My name is Angie, and I wanted to share my partial thyroidectomy story. Now, I want to make this disclaimer early on. I am just sharing my story and my opinions. I realize everyone has a different story, a different body, a different situation. There are always going to be situations where a thyroidectomy is necessary. You might have a cancer threat or a cancer scare, and you need to get your thyroid out. I get that. In my case, I did not have any sort of cancer signs. My thyroid, or I started off with a goiter. It was benign. And then I ended up getting thyroid nodules on the side of the thyroid that they kept in. And that's why I'm making this video, because the surgery for me, was not a resolution to the problem. It was like putting a Band-Aid on a wound, because I never, at least back then, didn't understand why I had thyroid problems. We don't just magically get thyroid problems for no reason. I used to look at disease as something that we got, we were just unlucky and we just happened to be one of these people that had this random disease. In a lot of cases, that's not true. The root of a lot of disease, particularly autoimmune disease, is stress. And having the surgery might get rid of the nodules, but if you don't understand why your body is inflamed, you're going to keep having problems. And that's what happened to me. So I was reading an article about a year or two after I had my partial thyroidectomy. And it said something like one of the most overperformed unnecessary surgeries is a thyroidectomy. The other one was a hysterectomy. I had both. And I now understand the reason I needed, or at least I thought I needed to have both. It was an underlying connection to both situations. Hormonal imbalances from stress, anxiety. And most women that I speak to that have or had thyroid problems will admit to having some sort of emotional stress in their life, ongoing. And studies have now shown that stress is the main root of most autoimmune disease. Long-term stress, chronic stress, maybe losing a loved one. I had a friend who developed colitis, which is an autoimmune disease of the intestine, right after her mom passed away. After a couple years of grieving, she developed an autoimmune disease. And so our bodies are reacting to this stress that we're putting it under. So let me share with you a little bit about the surgery, because I did have a complication during my surgery. I did lose my voice. I was told that I had a 1%, 2% chance of that happening. And I was the unlucky one that fell into the 1%, 2%. So what happened was, as he was trying to remove my goiter, he paralyzed the vocal cord. And so fortunately, I did get my voice back. It took about a month. And it was the most inconvenient thing to happen, because I had a conference to attend about a week after the surgery. So I went to the conference with no voice. So imagine being around hundreds of strangers that you don't know, trying to talk to people, and you have to whisper. It was a mess. But fortunately, my voice did come back fully, thankfully. But 6 years later, I was looking in the mirror and started to notice that the other side of my neck was starting to look a little swollen, uneven. Sure enough, went to my primary. She recommended me that I go see an endocrinologist. He did a scan, and sure enough, I had 10 nodules. And actually, when I had the goiter removed with the partial thyroidectomy, he told me after I woke up, he said, "You've got something on the other side as well." He said, "I didn't touch it, but there's something going on the other side too." And I had forgotten about that. So that was the nodules that were already forming on the other side. I just couldn't see them back then. So thankfully, the endocrinologist that I saw about the nodules, I was very glad that he wasn't a scissor-happy endocrinologist or surgeon. He basically said, you have the non-threatening kind. I don't remember what the actual classification was for them, but he said they are definitely not cancerous, but they are fluid-filled. And I thought to myself, well, if they are fluid-filled, they should just be able to dissolve, right? But I didn't find a lot of evidence at the time that people were shrinking their nodules. But he told me to go live my life. Don't worry about them. You're going to be fine. And I thought, okay, good. I don't have to have another surgery. My thyroid levels were normal. And that's the other thing I want to mention too. My thyroid levels were normal, in a normal range throughout this entire thing. When I had the goiter, they were normal, even though the goiter was huge. When I had my nodules, they were normal. They always came back normal. And that was the most puzzling thing for me. Why do I keep getting these growths on my neck, but my levels are normal? It didn't make sense to me at the time. It makes sense now. So the next thing I did is I started seeking help from holistic professionals, because what I learned from visiting my primary doctor, and this is no shade to primary doctors, but a lot of doctors do not study the connection between stress and autoimmune disease, or stress and sickness. They are trained and they go to school to study medicine, right? So they prescribe you some sort of medicine and send you on your way, but they don't really understand why we have these issues. So I decided to start going to see naturopaths and holistic practitioners. They're expensive and typically not covered by insurance, so I paid out of pocket, but it was one of the best things I ever did, because I had several tests done, and basically they all determined that my inflammation score in my body was very high, which is no surprise. I've always been a chronically anxious person. I've dealt with anxiety my entire life. I remember being as young as 5 and 6, feeling anxious, feeling not safe. And what was really frustrating for my situation is I didn't have trauma like you would think someone with anxiety would have. We're always taught that trauma in childhood is abuse, physical abuse, or the other kind of abuse. I don't want to say the S word because YouTube can be really weird with their rules now. But I didn't have any of that type of abuse as a child, but yet I was chronically anxious. And I later learned that being born premature or having parents that didn't allow you to feel safe to express your emotions can cause anxiety in children. I remember being a very anxious child, a very anxious teen. So what happens is over time, when you don't keep the anxiety or you don't get the anxiety in check, the first thing that happens is it begins to affect your digestion. You don't digest foods well. And when you don't digest foods well, you don't absorb the nutrients. And so as a result, your body becomes inflamed because you're not getting the nutrients that you need. And then you add more stress and anxiety on top of that because you're not getting the nutrients. And it's this cycle. So your body starts to break down. And this is when we get inflammation. This is when we get autoimmune disease. And so once I realized the connection, I started changing my diet. I started cutting out added sugars. I added a lot more leafy greens to my diet. I'm talking 3 gigantic salads per day on many days, not every day, but a lot of days. I started getting 10,000 steps every day. And not only did it improve my mood, but my anxiety lessened. And my anxiety had gotten so bad that I wasn't even able to sleep a lot of nights. I'm talking 2, 3, 4 hours of sleep. So after about 6 months to a year of changing my diet, working on my anxiety, I noticed that my nodules began to shrink. And let me tell you, they had gotten so big that when I would lie down at night, I felt like they were choking me. I mean, my neck felt really, really tight. They were a good size, and you could see them quite clearly. My neck was very, very uneven. Both my goiter and my nodules grew to a good size. And with the nodules, I had multiples. So I am a firm believer that mental health is the primary contributor, not just to thyroid disease or thyroid nodules, but autoimmune disease in general. And just like my nodules shrunk, I also believe my goiter would have shrunk had I been aware of the connection back then. So that's why I wanted to make this video. I personally, this is for me, I definitely regret having the surgery. Even though I got my voice back and everything's fine now, I always thought it was strange that I kept having all these thyroid problems, but all of my blood levels were normal. What is the cause of all this? What's going on? And I now understand that the thyroid is actually not the problem. The inflammation was the real problem. The stress and anxiety that was in my body too chronically caused my body to react, caused my hormones to get imbalanced, and my body began to attack itself, specifically my thyroid. So the thyroid is actually the innocent party here, especially with me because my levels were normal. Now, I can't speak for people that have, levels that are off. I still think stress and anxiety can be a cause of that as well. But for somebody like me that did have normal levels and I had no real other symptoms other than the unsightly nodules and goiter, It was stress. It was all stress. The thyroid was not the problem. It was the innocent party here. It was reacting to my body attacking itself. It was attacking the thyroid, basically. And why the thyroid? Well, when you have any sort of emotional stress long term, the thyroid tends to be susceptible to those kinds of attacks, especially in women. So a lot of times we carry our stress in our throat. I remember somebody used the analogy when you feel stifled emotionally, when you can't speak, you feel that in your throat area. And that's the one area that gets attacked by the body. It's kind of weird in a way. But that was my story. And I would just tell people, I would never say don't have the surgery because you might need to have the surgery. I would just say do your research. Look up the connection between stress, emotional well-being, and thyroid issues. There is a direct connection. I remember my primary doctor mentioning in the last 10 years, she's had more thyroid issues than she's ever seen. And I think it's a combination of stress, our diets, and typically stress and diets tend to go hand in hand, right? When we're stressed, we tend to have poorer diets. So that means we're getting fewer nutrients, which causes more inflammation, which causes more problems. It is definitely all connected. I am now almost nodule free, and you couldn't pay me to have this surgery now. I will keep this other half of my thyroid. I will keep these nodules, even if they don't go away completely. They aren't bothering me. They're now small enough to where I can barely see them. Now that I've been able to shrink them, I now know that there is a connection between stress, diet, and autoimmune disease. So just keep that in mind as you decide what's best for you. Thanks for listening.